Hello Internet, welcome back to Thrums to Twilight, the channel where I, Vincent, talk to you, the abyss, about books, movies, music I enjoy, find interesting, or a combination of the two. This is the February instalment in a series called Remembering, where I will be talking about albums released in 1996, giving my subjective opinion about the record, my own relationship to it, and whether or not I think it stands up when you listen to it today. In February 96, Nick Cave and the Bad Seeds released the album Murder Ballads. Murder Ballads is something like a concept album. As the title suggests, all the songs are about murder, except the last song, which is a Bob Dylan cover. Now let's talk a little bit about this album in the context of Nick Cave's career and also about my relationship to it before we look at the songs. This album came at a point in time where, in my opinion, Nick Cave and the band, the Bad Seeds, were at the absolute height of their powers. They released Henry's Dream in 1992. That album, in my opinion, is more or less flawless. They let Love in 1994. That album is many Nick Cave fans' favourite Nick Cave album. It's up there for me as well. It has many incredible songs on it. And then this album came out just 2 years later. This version of the band was also maybe the strongest lineup of the band. It had Blixa Bargeld in it still. Mick Harvey was maybe the main musical director at this time. It's before Warren Ellis joined the band. And the other members were Martin P. Casey, Conway Savage, Jim Sklavlunos, and Thomas Wilder on percussion. For me, this was the introduction to the Bad Seeds. It was the first album I heard by them. And it was also, I think, maybe the album that made Nick Cave more or less a household name. I kind of see this as being towards the end of an era. After this, he moved into more like writing ballads and things, and then slowly transitioned into a sound that is more influenced by Warren Ellis, the violin player and guitarist, and also keyboard player in the Bad Seeds now. Personally, I'm not a huge fan of the later Bad Seeds material, but this album means a great deal to me, as do the ones prior to it. And a couple of the later ones, but I'm not going to get into all of that right now. Okay, so this album is shocking, it's hilarious, it's creative, it's macabre, it's grotesque, it's beautiful. It's really a kind of summation of everything that made the early Bad Seeds material striking and compelling. It's also maybe more musically sophisticated than the albums that came before it, even though some of the tracks are quite simple. There's string arrangements on some of the material. The Bad Seeds are playing with a degree of subtlety and dynamics that you often don't hear on their earlier recordings, which are more kind of punk influenced. I already mentioned that this was my entry to the Bad Seeds, but also some years later, when I had a very difficult time in my life in my early 20s, this album was a source of great comfort to me. I listened to it a lot, so I really know it very well, and I was very grateful at the time that Nick Cave and this band were there to kind of give me a vision of the world that was dark and bleak and violent, but also really playful and funny. Back in the 90s, though, one thing that this album did was that it opened my mind up to hip-hop indirectly. I grew up in a culture in the United Kingdom in the early 90s where hip-hop was kind of vilified as being a violent music, involving a lot of stories about killing and violence and so forth. And I remember when this album by Nick Cave and the Bad Seeds kind of got the position that it got within the culture in the 90s, from the mid to the late 90s, and people talked about it and it was written about in newspapers and so on. I started to think, wait a minute, why can Nick Cave write a whole album about killing people, but when Biggie does it, it's not acceptable or it's frowned upon? And I remember talking to a friend at school and saying exactly this, and my friend said, yeah, but it's because Nick Cave is writing fiction. And then that was when I realized how extremely racist the attitude towards hip-hop actually was, and it was a big challenge to me that helped me to become more interested in it in the years that followed. Alright, so the question is, does this album still stand up listening to it today? And it's some years since I've given it any attention, so I've been listening to it the last couple of days to give you my opinion on this, and we're going to go through it track by track. Now the opener, Song of Joy, a very ironic title because it's a song of misery. It's the voice of a man coming to the door of a stranger at night and telling a story about how his family were killed. But he describes the family as extremely miserable prior to this. The children never speak. The wife is a kind of shell of a woman. And this kind of raises the obvious question, well, why are his wife and children like this? And then one night, the family are killed when he claims that he was away visiting a friend. And he ends the song by asking whether the listener will let him in to their house. This is a very clever opener for the album because it's kind of setting the scene of unreliable narrators, stories of murder, dangerous men, and it's asking you in an indirect way, are you sure you want to listen to the rest of this album? Do you reckon me a friend? I think the strengths of this song are also kind of something that might be its weaknesses for some people. It's extremely writerly, it's very narrative, it's not super gripping musically because the music is basically a bed for the story that Nick Cave is telling with this framing narrative and this direct address. So the question of whether you want to listen to this song repeatedly really is a question of whether you want to hear that story again and again and again. Track 2, Stagger Lee, this is a version of an African American folk song which has been passed down through oral tradition about a gangster or a hustler who's totally amoral. There are many different versions of it, and Nick Cave found the version that he sings on this album just transcribed, the words found in a book, and he created the music with the band to tell this story about Stagger Lee, who comes into a bar and just kind of starts killing people and is obviously bisexual, threatening, totally amoral. The song is offensive, it's horrifying, it's hilarious, and the outro must be one of the most iconic Nick Cave and the Bad Seeds musical moments ever. I've actually been lucky enough to be on stage when they've been performing it in Oslo, and that's got to be one of the most exhilarating moments of my life. Okay, track 3, Henry Lee. I wonder if this is how the album originally came to my attention, because this has PJ Harvey on it, and I was very enamored of PJ Harvey in the 90s. I will put a video in the description showing Nick Cave and PJ Harvey performing this on television. I remember seeing this on this program called The White Room, and the chemistry between them is just insane. This is another traditional. They're doing a version of an old folk song. I just think that kind of Nick Cave and PJ Harvey at this point in history in the mid-90s were just such a beautiful and strange contrast to the rest of the culture. British culture at the time was kind of all about optimism and partying, and it was very masculine in a very particular way. It was like middle class guys pretending to be working class guys, drinking beers, listening to Pulp and Blur and Oasis. And then you had PJ Harvey and Nick Cave doing this weird, sophisticated, gothic folk song that sounded like something recorded in the 60s. Track 4 is a track that is kind of forgettable. It's called Lovely Creature. It's almost like a rockabilly type track. It has some beautiful female vocals in the background. It works very well in the context of the album, kind of spacing out these far more lush arrangements. I just don't think necessarily that it's a song that you would kind of return to out of context of the album. But it creates a nice space between Henry Lee and the 5th track, Where the Wild Roses Grow. This track is a collaboration with Kylie Minogue. And what I think is incredible about this song is that it's sung from the perspective of a ghost. Like Kylie Minogue's character, Eliza Day, is singing that they call me the wild rose, but my name was Eliza Day. Why they call me it, I do not know, for my name was Eliza Day. It was that when she was living. And then the story of the song told back and forth in Call and Return between her and Nick Cave about these lovers, where she is seduced and murdered by Nick Cave's character, answers the question of why she is called the Wild Rose. This song actually is a really simultaneously beautiful but also harrowing story of the murder of a woman and of misogyny. It's also so incredibly well performed by both vocalists, and Nick Cave's singing is much more kind of respectful and tactful on this than on most of the rest of the album. The Bad Seeds then do something that I personally am a sucker for. They do a completely brutal transition from this gorgeous composition into just sounds of chaos and screaming and a Wurlitzer organ immediately at the end of the song, which takes you into the next track, The Curse of Millhaven. And The Curse of Millhaven is probably my favourite song on the record. It's like a fast country rock song, but it's just completely hilarious. Like, it's told from the perspective of this teenage girl, Loretta, who kind of welcomes you to Mohaven at the beginning and introduces herself and tells you that she's got green eyes and yellow hair, that she's always combing. And the writing is just brilliant. Like, it starts to introduce this series of murders. And she says, for example, our town fell into a state of shock. A lot of people were saying things that made little sense. The next thing you know, the head of Handyman Joe was found in the fountain at the mayor's residence. So it's like the rhymes are brilliant. It's very visual. And it's also, each murder is just described in this completely hilarious fashion. It doesn't take long before one person reveals that actually the narrator, Lottie, is the murderer, and she then admits this and acknowledges a whole load of other killings that she's also carried out. But she says that one murder that she didn't do is the murder of a dog that was the dog of a teacher at the school that was found nailed to his door. And she says, I never crucified little Biko. That was two junior high school psychos. Stinky Bahoon and his friend with a pumpkin-sized head. Like, come on. Unfortunately, The Curse of Millhaven is followed by the album's weakest song, The Kindness of Strangers. This is the story of Mary Bellows, who travels to see the sea and unfortunately is killed. It's a very repetitive song musically. It seems to kind of be attempting to be in the same register as Where the Wild Roses Grow, but the band don't have the same subtlety. It doesn't have as complex an arrangement. And for me, at this point in the album, it's one too many dead women, just personally, especially because the writing is not as entertaining or humorous, but it's also, it doesn't really reach any kind of very moving level of pathos. So I kind of see this song as a bit of a failure. I can see exactly why it is placed where it is in the album, because it's breaking up these other very kind of narrative songs that are much more kind of exciting and enjoyable. But I just think they could have done a better song here. The following song, though, which is another kind of more slow burning track, but it's much more groovy, is a song called Crow Jane. And it's between The Curse of Millhaven and Crow Jane for my favourite songs on the album. Crow Jane is a revenge song about a woman who's sexually assaulted. It's so well written. The groove is brilliant. It's a kind of blues. It has this great backing vocal, and it has such great details. Like, at a certain point, Crow Jane goes to buy guns, and the narrator of the song is talking to the people who own the gun shop, and he's saying, Mr. Smith and Mr. Weston, why you close up shop so late? And they explain that they've sold guns to a woman who looks like a bird. But when the names of the shop owners are said, Mr. Smith and Mr. Weston, there's a sound of a gunshot in the background, played by, I think, the guitarist. It's just such a beautiful little detail. Crow Jane is also one of the few songs on the album where the murders are extremely cathartic. Like, you're like happy that she's done what she's done. She's gone to the new town and she's halved the population. In other words, she's killed all the men because they assaulted her. Now, the last original composition on the album is O'Malley's Bar, and this song is completely insane. Like, the narrator is insane. The number of killings in the song is crazy, but also it's 15 minutes long. And it only really has two musical sections. It has like a kind of interlude, and then it just has like the main sort of groove of the song. And over the top of it, Nick Cave is performing as this guy who's gone into his local bar and decided to kill everybody that is in there. And he performs it as if he is insane. He's even doing these really weird vocalizations in between the verses. And this guy, he spends the entire song basically self-aggrandizing as if he's some kind of demigod. And then in the last moments of the song proves to be a total coward. The writing in this song is just excellent. One of the things that I love about it is that he opens the song by describing himself as thin and enviably tall and handsome in a certain light and from a certain angle. And then later, when he kills his first victim, he says, well, the thunder from my steel fist, it made all the glasses jangle. When I shot him, I was handsome. It was the light, it was the angle. I have other favourite songs on the album, but I do think that O'Malley's Bar is a song that only Nick Cave and the Bad Seeds could have done. It's like they're at a point in their career where they've really found their style. In some ways, it's a shame that they moved away from this style, although I have an idea that maybe Nick Cave felt that it was kind of beginning to approach self-parody. But really, nobody could have done this song in this way with this content and made it so arresting apart from this band. Now, the last song on the album, Death Is Not the End, it's a Bob Dylan cover and it's sung by various members and friends of the band. I understand the idea of this song. I think it's trying to kind of bring the album to a close with friendship, with playfulness, with life, with some sense of warmth, and also a kind of joke to lighten the mood. But to me, like sonically, this track has never worked. So this one, along with The Kindness of Strangers, are two tracks that I don't really think stand up to the test of time that well. Overall, though, this album, when I return to it, is still almost shockingly strong. Like, it shames much of what was released at the time when it came out, but it also kind of hangs over Nick Cave's subsequent career, in my opinion, as an obvious highlight. And I just think if you've never listened to this album, definitely give it a listen. If you have listened to it, if you have a relationship to it, I would love to hear from you and hear your opinion about it. It's been fun to talk to you about it for a little while, and I hope to see you again. Lots of love.